لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So I just left maybe the Kitab al-Itq or Manumission because I didn't have enough time to finish it last lesson. So I'll just go through it inshallah today, and then we'll go back and do a quick kind of revision of the semester of what we covered, and I'll kind of remind you what the important points are going to be for assessment at the end, inshallah. We'll have 2 dates for assessment. We'll have something at the end of Ramadan and something during the first week of Eid. Try to choose one of them, please, because when you don't choose one of them and we have to kind of find another time, it becomes like really tiring for us to figure that out and to find someone to mark them. And until now, I haven't been able to bring out the marks of the first semester, but because of how kind of convoluted the whole system was. I do want to accommodate people, honestly, but you have to kind of play ball a little bit with me so that I don't have too many timings for exams, so I can actually get it all in one place and then get it marked. Because I do need help from some brothers to help me doing that. It's hard for me to do it. So we'll suggest maybe 2 dates, or we'll put 2 dates and then try to choose one of them. And if you positively cannot do one of them, then just let us know and we'll figure something out, inshallah, for you. Okay. Kitab al-Itq, Manumission. This is very obviously, what relevance does it have today? Not much. The relevance that it has today is just understanding that this was a big part of Islamic law. Like music does not show up in Matn Abu Shuja', does it? Is there a chapter of music? Was it talked about at all? This is very important today, but it's not talked about. It didn't qualify as something that had enough importance to be talked about in the book. But Itq did, because Itq is important. The concept of freeing a slave or removing them from slavery was very important. So there were rulings that were associated with it, and that tells you, about things. Something that makes its way to a book of fiqh usually is very important, meaning the issue comes up a lot. The Prophet ﷺ talked about it a lot, and the Sahaba and the people after talked about it a lot, so it qualified to have a chapter in a book of fiqh. Something that wasn't talked about at all, or had very little, it just doesn't come up in a book of fiqh. So you kind of figure out, that's just a way to kind of know the importance of something during an Islamic era, based on, does it show up in a book of fiqh or not? So this is 800 years after the Prophet ﷺ died, or passed away, ﷺ, and still we don't have these issues coming in books of fiqh because they were not important. Muslims did not struggle with them. They didn't have a lot of questions to ask about them. And it didn't matter that much, so they didn't come. But Itq is because Itq was a big deal. It was left towards the end. It's not because it's least important, but you actually leaving something towards the end usually means significance, not the opposite. And scholars have always kind of talked about that in the past. But I just want you to know a few things about them, because this was an important aspect of Islamic law, the importance of freeing people from slavery. And that's why the word Itq, we use it from Itq min al-nar today, because that's what we hope for, inshallah, in Ramadan. But Itq in general as a concept, Itq raqaba, you find it in the Quran, is talking about freeing someone from slavery. That's an amazing deed. There's a lot of philosophical, conceptual issues regarding slavery and religions. The best act of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the highest act of expiation within any sin that you do is always Itq. So that's, what does that tell you? That slavery is good? No, it's telling you that freeing people out of slavery is good. So obviously, because it goes without saying that someone losing their freedom is an extremely negative thing. But the social contracts of those times, that's how it worked. You can ask, why did Islam just come and abolish the idea? Well, Islam couldn't even abolish the problem of khamr. It took 18 years for khamr to actually be fully. The concept of tahrim, when you do tahrim, when you actually prohibit something for a society, this is an extremely complex behavior. It's very hard to do so. So the Prophet ﷺ came with only maybe one thing that he needed to abolish completely, which is shirk. He had to remove polytheism. Removing that philosophically had to happen like ripping off a band-aid. Everything that would follow could happen with some graduality to it, because it would just fall as consequences from abolishing the basic problem, which is shirk. But trying to remove something like the social contract of slavery, had he brought that forward, he would have definitely lost the battle. Meaning, people would not have accepted Islam. It would be too difficult. People could barely accept it with just some changes, like removal of riba, removal of zina, just these small stuff, and people still struggled heavily with the idea. So a system was put in place to make sure and allow people to remove themselves from slavery. So if you close the faucet in terms of where slaves come from, and you open the door to make sure that people can remove, it's just a matter of time, and slavery will kind of end itself. And it did. And that's the important part of understanding Islamic history, that slavery over 1,100 years basically ceased to exist in the Middle East in the form that we understand it to be. Meaning, when you look at slavery in North America, when was it ended? less than a century ago or something. In the Islamic world, that has been gone for a long time. It didn't happen through civil war. It didn't happen through a huge revolution. It just happened through the continuous practice of certain Islamic laws. It just slowly removed itself. And that's very important to understand from a historic perspective as well. There were some revolutions for al-Mamalik during Islamic law, but they didn't cover the whole spectrum of the Islamic world. It could happen in specific places. But slavery ceased to exist in the majority of the Islamic states just through the natural source of just you stop the input and then you increase the amount of channels for the output, and then you end up with nothing. And that's basically how this worked. So I think it's important taking a moment just to look at it. So والولاء من يقول الإمام المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه والولاء من حقوق العتق وحكمه حكم التعصيب عند عدمه وينتقل الولاء عن المعتق إلى الذكور من عصبته وترتيب العصبات في الولاء كترتيبهم في الإرث ولا يجوز بيع الولاء ولا هبته. So wala is a right associated with manumission. Its ruling is akin to the inheritance ruling in the absence of the deceased universal inheritor. So if you remember, going back to the universal inheritors, there was always al-wali al-mu'tiq. If you remember that, I used to tell you just ignore it because it's not important. But this is where it comes from, meaning when someone is freed, then he owes loyalty to the person that freed them. They're not owned by them, but there's a loyalty issue. So if there's no universal inheritor, that person that freed them will behave like a universal inheritor if there's no universal inheritor. So when that person, if I'm a slave and I'm freed by my master, I'm no longer a slave anymore. I owe loyalty to that person. I'm loyal to the person who freed me. And then if I die and there are no universal inheritors for me, then he will behave. He or she, by the way. So this is where a woman actually behaves as a universal inheritor. So it doesn't have to be male. It could be a female as well. And that's a specific ruling that exists here. Upon death, wala passes from the one who freed the slave to the deceased male universal inheritors. The order of the universal inheritors here is as the order for inheritance. So once the person who freed me dies, it goes to his son or whoever the universal inheritor of that person is. So it behaves almost as if I'm related to them. And they use the word, so it's the wala, right? The word wala. And that's where you get for the word mawla from. So you'll find Salim, Mawla Abi Hudayfa, for example. Salim was a kid that was bought, and he was removed from his family when he was very young, and was bought and sold through slavery, and ended up in the house of Abu Hudayfa, one of the known scholars, or one of the known Sahaba of the Ansar. And Abu Hudayfa basically freed him. So no one knew his parents because he was removed too young. He couldn't trace it back. So he was known as Salim, Mawla Abi Hudayfa. And this granted people a specific ability to have status, even though they were not known where they came from, even though there was no, and this was an extremely important system that today has been removed and causes a sequelae of problems. Like there's so much issue that come from the lack of this. So people who didn't know their backgrounds, or they didn't know who their fathers were, or they were born into waliyadu billah zina, or they were born out of there was something wrong in their behind. They always had to have someone who was their mawla, someone that they associated themselves with. And this is outside of slavery. This is just in general. So everyone who didn't have a tribe to protect them, were not a part of a long lineage, they had to attach themselves to some group, not by becoming a part of that lineage, but instead of saying Fulan ibn Fulan, it was Fulan Mawla Fulan. And Mawla means that the loyalty is granted to this family. This family will treat this person as their inheritors, and they will grant this person protection. And the way you treat this family is how you treat this person. Does that make sense? Meaning, so the Prophet ﷺ, his Zayd was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad. When that was taken away, he was known as Zayd Mawla Rasulullah ﷺ. Till this day, Zayd Mawla Nabi ﷺ, his Mawla. Mawla means that he offers him the loyalty. So he's treated in the same respect that the Prophet ﷺ is treated. That's why when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Abu Bakr said, I only took it on because Zayd was dead. Like he was deceased. He was martyred in the Battle of Mu'tah a couple of years before. He's like, that's the only reason I'm Khalifa. If Zayd was alive, we would have gone to Zayd immediately, just based on the fact that he is Mawla Nabi alayhi salam. So you treat him the same respect. So that's an important piece, and it made a big difference for people. It made a very big difference, and it kept the order in society going. Today we live. This is chaos. You think this is civilization? This is chaos. This is completely chaotic, the way that we're living today. No one knows anybody. We have no idea where people are coming from. We We have no idea who's from who and who belongs to. We have no, people are just walking around. There's nothing. There's no order to society any longer. I'm not talking about tribalism, but there was some degree of clarity. People knew who you were, where you came from, what you were, what values you were raised upon, and which family you belonged to, and what that meant. That was very important. That was very valuable. Today, we've civilized ourselves by living in small matchboxes that go up maybe a couple of floors, but we've lost a lot of organization and order in our society because that's not there. So if you didn't have a family and you had to be a mawla of someone, you couldn't just walk around. You couldn't just walk into a tribe and say, I'm Fulan. Yeah, where you come from? I'm just, no, you need to know. And if you don't, if you're not known and your lineage is not known, then you have to become a mawla of some family here. Someone has to vouch for you and you have to be loyal to them. Or if you know who your family is, go and live with your family. What are you doing here? Or if you're going to live here, there has to be some understanding between the two. This is to keep people safe, and this is to make sure that everyone has a space to live in where they're going to be respected and treated equally. So when that was removed out of society, it became very difficult. So now there's a lot of chaos in the world today because of how we actually have changed things around. Especially in the West. So I don't fully understand it. But I think understanding wala is actually, and this is not, again, it's not specifically for slaves, but it does occur for slaves. Slaves, when they leave their slavery, those who have families, they're just fine. They just go, there's no wala, they just go to their families. For example, when a war happens and the person that is incarcerated or enslaved or turns into a slave, if this person is known where they come from, then the moment they're free, they just go and they become a part of, go back to their family. Like the daughter of Hatim al-Ta'i, for example, is her father's Hatim al-Ta'i, min Tayy, which is a known tribe. Once she was free, she just went back to her tribe. But if the slave doesn't know where he comes from, or she comes from, or they have no way to go back, or they are this second or third generation slavery, how are they going to exist in the world safely? How are they going to function? How are they going to work? How are they going to live? They need to have a mawla. They have to have somebody that they can refer to, someone to vouch for them, something to help them. And that was forced the master to do that as well. But they weren't responsible for them financially, which is an important piece of it. So once they're freed, the master doesn't have to spend money, but he does have to vouch for them, has to continue to act as their guardian or chaperone. Yeah. No, it continues. It always continues for as long as and that family will be mawla this family always, and that keeps them safe and that keeps them protected and keeps them a part of a lineage, so they're a part of something. And the Prophet ﷺ, a lot of families became mawali lin-Nabi ﷺ. A lot of families would just ask to be a mawla to the Prophet ﷺ's lineage because they would come from Khurasan, or they would come from parts of the world where they didn't fit in the area, so they wanted to be a mawla to a known family, so they looked for one of the families of the Prophet ﷺ, or a Qurashi family, and they would then out. And that's how Mecca works till this day. If you go to Mecca, it still works that way. No. If the master frees them, then they stay loyal to the master. And so wala is a right to the associated with manumission. Whoever does the manumission, like whoever actually frees them, the wala goes to them. Whoever actually does it. So if the master, then it stays to the master. And if it's someone else who's buying them out, then it's someone else. Like Abu Bakr, Bilal was always the mawla Abu Bakr. Because Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is the one who bought him out of slavery, so there was always that wala. So whenever Bilal spoke after he was always speaking, and people had to respect him as they would respect Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, which gave him radiallahu anhu the ability to kind of function. And that's how he himself married a lady from Quraysh, and his daughter, his brother married a lady from Quraysh, and his children, and they integrated fully into society as being mawali Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So yes, it's whoever does the manumission. Okay. It is not permissible to sell wala nor to give it as a gift. You can't say, well, this person I'm their mawla or they're my mawla, I'm going to give it to you. No, that is not something transferable. It's not something transferable. So this stays, and it's not gifted or transferable. It's whoever does the manumission who holds on to that, to the loyalty. And it's a very important social system that fixes a lot of problems. والكتابة مستحبة إذا سألها العبد وكان مأمونا مكتسبا ولا تصح إلا بمال معلوم ويكون مؤجلا إلى أجل معلوم وأقله نجمان وهي من جهة السيد لازمة ومن جهة العبد المكاتب جائزة فله فسخها متى شاء وللمكاتب التصرف فيما في يده من المال وعلى السيد أن يضع من مال الكتابة ما يستعين به على أداء نجوم الكتابة ولا يعتق إلا بعد أداء جميع المال. So if a slave requests to purchase his freedom, it is recommended that the owner accept the request if the slave is trustworthy and employed. And this is what the Shafi'iyya say. The rest of them don't see it to be recommended, they actually see it to be obligatory. And the system that ran in the Khilafah for the longest time was that if the master refused, then the slave could go to the judicial system and actually make it mandatory. So, and it's obviously يعني الذين يبتغون الكتاب مما ملكت أيمانكم فكاتبوهم, as the Quran gives a very clear يعني command, إن علمتم فيهم خيرا, if you know that they're capable, again, if they're trustworthy and they're able to be employed. Why does that matter? Because if you free somebody and they have no way to make, and they're not employed and they're not trustworthy, and they start causing chaos, they start killing and stealing and causing problems. So no, they probably are better off having them with you. Again, this is looking at how to keep a society safe and a society functional. The contract is not valid unless there is a specified amount that is deferred to a known date. The amount must be paid in at least 2 installments. The owner cannot revoke the contract, although the slave is entitled to do so whenever he wishes. So once they agree to a time and an amount, the owner cannot change it, but the slave can stop anytime. He's like, I don't want to buy myself anymore. I want to stay with this. And this would happen quite a bit. Interestingly enough, it would happen quite a bit. Again, in the study, and when you read a little bit in history, and you see kind of the stories of where people would be offered, like offered freedom, and they would say no. It's very interesting, and it doesn't come from the lack of wanting to be free. It comes from the fact that this is the only life they understand. This is the only way they can function in society appropriately, and they just can't do it any other way. So they require to stay. This is the only way they can continue to live and to take care of themselves and their families, and they would actually request to stay the way they are. And this happened a lot. This happened. There's a story for the Hasan al-Basri that he freed a family, and they came back and asked to be bought back in. Like they want to be back because they can't survive. He refused, but he took care of them. But the story is interesting. Like they actually came back asking for and you let us free, take us back. It's just too difficult because the social the society itself. It was hard to survive in it. 100,000 years ago, it's not easy to kind of survive in societies, especially if you don't have a specific skill set. If you don't have, like, the way the world works today is very, very different than the way it worked back then. So I think it's important for people to sometimes travel and go see. You don't travel just to see buildings and whatnot. Go travel and see how people live and figure out, like, because there are parts of the world where a lot of the systems that existed back then still, to a certain degree, kind of exist. So you can start drawing some analogies and appreciating maybe how things occurred back then and why some of these rulings actually are very important. A slave who is purchasing his freedom is entitled to dispose of property in his possession. It is obligatory, meaning he doesn't have to pay it all at once. He can do whatever he wants with his wealth. It is obligatory for the owner to reduce a portion of the manumission price so that the slave can use it to help pay the installments. The slave is not free until he has paid the price in full. But this is just kind of gives you an idea of the rulings regarding what it meant to actually remove yourself from slavery and the fact that they were obligated to do this. So I think that's the end of the text. So what we're going to do is just go back maybe 100 slides or something. Can you just go back to the beginning of it? So what I'll do a quick kind of walk down for you from the beginning, from go to Mawarith as much as possible. And then we'll walk through them a little bit, and I'll just point out some important stuff for you to kind of prepare or to study and look at, because it's important. These slides and the information on the slides is all you need. You don't really need much more. Like I don't require you to go. We do have, like, if you go to the global classroom, there's these slides, and then there are like the more in-depth slides. So you can always go to those if you want. Those are kind of extra reading for you if you want to educate yourself a bit more. I can tell you that learning fiqh and learning Islam is going to require a lot of kind of self-directed learning. You have to read. You have to read and learn, or you end up with just basic information. What I'm sharing with you are just the basics, the stuff that you definitely need to know. Everything I'm telling you, you 100% need to understand. You can't afford not to understand something I'm explaining. You can afford not to understand other stuff, but you should read them definitely so that you have some idea about them. But everything in these slides are fair game. All right. So anything that I have in the slides, I may ask you about, especially the explanations in English that I put after a slide. They're important for you to take a moment to read them and make sure that they kind of sink in. Again, these are verdicts, right? Like I'll remind you again, fiqh are the verdicts. Law, right, is the qawaid al-fiqhiyya, which we'll do inshallah maybe in a few semesters. And then constitution is basically usul al-fiqh. But we're just studying verdicts. I don't need you to memorize every verdict, but I do need to understand the philosophy behind some of these verdicts and how they work and the stuff that actually are relevant to you so you can practice them appropriately. Definitely, inheritance and bequests are extremely, extremely important for you. because this is something that actually affects your life and affects everybody's life. And the lack of understanding of this is a reason or a root of a lot of problems that happen in the world today. A lot of people are deprived of their rightful inheritance, take more or take less from what they should take, and that's obviously that's where your mal becomes haram. And once mal becomes haram, nothing is fixable anymore. Like once you allow mal haram into your life, you actually open up upon yourself a door that's very difficult to close, and the consequences of problems that come from that are undeniable. So these are just the verses that we talked about in the Quran. There are 3 slides that talk about the verses. So male inheritors, we talk about the different types of males that can inherit, the different types of females that can inherit. Just know who can inherit. This doesn't mean that they always inherit, as I explained. It just means that they can. They can inherit in the right circumstance, with the right situation, they can inherit. It doesn't mean that they definitely will, right? So this is just what he's pointing out here. These, know them like the back of your hand. When someone dies, these 5 people will always inherit: the spouses, the parents, and direct descendants, daughters and sons. 100%. Someone passes away, these 5 must inherit. So you need to always look for them. Is there a mother? Is there a father? She died, is there a husband? He died, is there a wife? Are there daughters? Are there sons? If yes, you put them on top of each other like that, because those are 100% going to inherit. And if most of them, if they're all there, then you don't need to add anyone else. No one else matters. Like if all of them are there, you don't have really, there's no one else who's going to find a spot. Like no one else is going to exist. People who are added to inheritance calculations are added because someone here does not exist. Someone isn't there, so they're brought in for a reason. But if these people are all there, then no one else will inherit. Will a brother inherit with a father? No. Will a brother inherit with a son? No, right? So these people don't inherit. They only come into the equation if there's no one else, if neither a father nor a son, immediate descendants, are there. So know these very well. And of course, this is whoever inherits. All you need to know of this is al-qatil, meaning someone who committed murder, and an al-murtad, someone, and an apostate. Explain a few things here. The asabat are important, not the whole thing. The universal inheritors, the people who pick up everything at the end, is not important to know all of them, but it's important to know maybe the first 4 or 5. So know that it starts with the son first, and then the son's son, right? And then if not, then the father, and then the father's father, and then a full brother, and then a consanguine brother. So know the first maybe 4 or 5, just know how it works. So a father is not a asaba when the son is there, because that's important to know, right? Like a father will not pick up if a son is there, or a grandson is there. If a grandson is alive, the father will get his. How much does the father get? Yeah, so he gets a 1/6, and that's it. And this grandson will pick up the rest if he's alive. That's important. Now he talks about the furud, so he says there's different shares are mentioned: half, quarter, eighth, 2/3, a third, and a sixth. And this is going to be important for you when you're given, there'll be 2 or 3 problems that you have to solve, or you have to make the calculations. So it's important to be able to go back and remind yourself of what do they inherit. Try to memorize them, try to know who inherits what. It's helpful to know a little bit. So when you talk about a half, and it's a daughter, a son's daughter, a full sister. I didn't actually go through these one, but I didn't give you an example for each and every one of them because I don't care that you memorize all of them. What I want you to take away for this preliminary text is to know how to do a basic calculation for something simple. Now, the assignment I gave you, most of it is awl. Most of what I gave you in the assignment is awl. Maybe the 3 out of 5 of them, maybe 4 of them have awl in them, just because it's important to learn. When there's too many shares, you're going to end up everyone losing a little bit, and that piece is important because it happens a lot. Like it's something that happens within Islamic law quite a bit. So I put a lot of awl there, and I think there's an example of rad. I'm not sure, but those 2 are important to understand. But you need to always go back to see who gets what. And this is probably an important slide for you to understand. So the sudus, when it comes to the 6th specifically, the mother, if an immediate descendant, a son's descendant, or 2 or more siblings are present, right? Because a mother usually gets 3 unless there's an immediate descendant, a son's descendant, or 2 or more siblings. 1 sibling, no. If there's only 1 sibling, she still gets the 3rd. If there's only 1 brother, then in for example, there's no son or father, so the brother's going to inherit. She still gets a 3rd because a brother doesn't know. 2 brothers or more, or 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, she ends up going back to a 6th. Again, I want to ask you this in a calculation. But I will ask you to kind of give me a little bit of a breakdown for what a mother would get. So you'd have to go searching a little bit to see what does she get and why. Like when would she get this and when she would get that. Know a little bit about the mother's specific problem. And the father. The father, provided an immediate descendant or a son's descendant is present, he'll get a sixth. So know how of how fathers inherit, because we'll come to a slide that has that in it again. Omission is important. Understanding a little bit of how people are omitted. Omitted meaning they're removed, they're not going to inherit, right? So I'm coming up, I want to inherit my cousin or my uncle or my brother. If there's someone there, I'm omitted. If the son's there, I have no business attending at all. If the father's there, I don't even go because it's not I don't get anything out of this, right? So the father's present causes the grandfather to be omitted. The mother's, so you're kind of understanding this is important. So take a little bit of a read about that. All right. So this is very important. I got a lot of questions about this when it comes to the bequest or bequeathing something. You cannot give away more than a third of what is left after they remove the huquq, meaning if you owe debt somehow, you remove all the debt is taken away right off the bat. And then the wasiyah can only be in a third. Can't be more than a third. If I give my wasiyah and you calculate my wasiyah, it's end up half of what I own. Then you only give away a third of what I own. The other sixth that's left, you have to ask the inheritors. Are we okay giving away a sixth? If one person says no, then it's not given away. All it takes is one person to say no. Everyone has to be unanimous amongst all the inheritors to say, yes, we're okay with, if he gave away half his thing, we're okay with that. You're not allowed to actually do anything with more than a third. Now, we talked about the obligatory bequest, meaning if you have people in who aren't going to inherit you. For example, if someone had a daughter or a son who passed away and left children, and they have sons and daughters, so this person probably will not inherit, then they are deserving of a obligatory bequest. And I put that up in the slides as well. It's very important. Because if these people aren't going, and they get, from that third, the grandfather or the father is capable of actually leaving something for them. Because they won't inherit otherwise. That's very important to kind of remember. And I put that, I kind of wrote that down in the slides. All right, this is all. So we went through all of these, and I gave you examples. What I'm going to do is just point out maybe one or two. So this is called Mas'alatan al-Gharrawan, right? And this is where, or they call it Mas'al al-Umariyya. This is where Umar al-Khattab, there was a little bit of a, so when a lady or a man, they die and leave a spouse, a mother and a father, then you take off what the spouse is owed right off the bat, and then the mother takes a third of what is left, not a third of everything, right? So she takes a third of what is left after you remove the share that the spouse is going to have, right? So when there's only a spouse and a mother and a father, whether it's a man who's passing away leaving a wife or a wife passing away leaving a husband, makes no difference. You give the spouse what they're deserved. The spouse just takes what they're owed right off the bat. Just give them that, and then the third that the mother takes, because the father is asaba, the father is going to pick up at least sixth, and the rest, then they basically go, she gets a third of what is left, and he picks up the 2/3. So these are important to understand, so take some time to look at them, because they do have some degree of significance in Islamic law. What else do I need you to know? So the father's inheritance options. This is very important too. Okay, I need you to make sure you understand this. There are three ways for the father to inherit. A father will either inherit as with only getting a sixth, which is his fard. He'll get the fixed share that he deserved, which is a sixth, and that's when there is an immediate descendant to his son or his son's son, right? So he's going to get only a sixth because he does not, he's not a universal inheritor. If, on the other hand, there is a descendant, but the descendant is not a male, is a female, then he takes his sixth, and he's a universal inheritor, so he picks up whatever's left. So the daughter gets a half, for example, and then he gets a sixth plus the fact that he's a universal inheritor in this example. Right? Over here, when there's no universal inheritor and there's no direct descendants, right, then he is asaba. Okay, when he's going to be universal inheritor, he'll pick up whatever's left, so the wife will take a fourth, and then he'll take whatever's left. If these are the only two people in that person's life. So a man died, all he had was a father and a wife. That's it. There's no one else. He has no children. He has no, his mother's not around. Then that's how this works. So there's three examples of how he inherits. Either he gets a fixed share, or he's a universal inheritor, or if there's no male descendants, but there's female descendants, then he gets his share plus asaba. And this is important because at least one of the problems that you'll get will have a father inheriting a little bit in a way where you have to kind of be aware of it, because that's important. It happens a lot. All right. So this is al-awl, not al-iwal, it's al-awl. Don't know why I'm embarrassed of the lack of pronunciation for this. Al-awl. And what does this mean? And this means, very importantly, I explained it to you. No, the issue of al-awl is when the full sum of percentages owed to heirs is more than 100%. In that case, all heirs lose an amount of inheritance adversely proportionate to their percentage. So this is when we have too many shares. The shares add up to more than one. Like you have a third and a half and a sixth and another third and another sixth. So now we have more than 100%. So what do? Everyone gets a little bit less. So that everyone gets a little less based on whatever their shares were. And this happens when there's a lot of ashab al-furud. So when you have, for example, a husband, a father, a mother, and 2 daughters, this is obviously going to be tazahum al-fara'id, right? Because the 2 daughters alone always get 2/3. Remember, when there's no male descendant, there's no son, and there are 1 daughter, she gets half. 2 daughters get 2/3. 3 daughters get what? 2/3. 4 daughters get 2/3. It doesn't matter after 1. It just keeps on going to 2/3, whoever the number is. But then 2/3, they're owed that. The mother's owned a 1/6 because there's a direct descendant. She doesn't get a 1/3, there's a 1/6 because there's a direct descendant. The father here is going to be asaba, but he gets 1/6 as well, because that's his fard. You can't get less than that. If there's no male descendant, he gets 1/6 plus asaba, and then the husband gets a 1/4. Or if it's the opposite, because it's the exact same example here, then the wife gets an 1/8. Either way, it all adds up to more than 100%. So what you do is you just basically do the regular calculation. You figure out what the common denominator is. You times it, you give each one the amount, and then you find that when you add them up together, it's more than 12, because 12 is the common denominator for a 4th and a 6th and whatever. So you just add up these numbers, scratch this one out, and put that number on top. It's the most simple of all calculations, and Islam is very important because it happens a lot. And the known example of Ali ibn Abi Talib actually doing it on the minbar. When they gave him, he asked him this question, and they said, how is she going to get an 1/8? And he was on the minbar when someone yelled out this mas'ala over here. They yelled it out on him. So he said, كَانَ لَهَا الثُّمُنْ فَصَارَ لَهَا التُّسُعُ. She used to get an 1/8, she's going to get a 9th. So when you think of what is 3 out of 27th? Right? A 9th. Right on the minbar, who just did the calculation in his head and said she's going to get a 9th, not an 8th anymore. But she's not the only person losing. Everyone is losing a specific portion of the inheritance because everyone is deserving of inheritance. It's just there's too many people. So al-awl is very important. Make sure you understand it, because I will. Al-rad is the opposite, when there's not enough people to inherit the money. There's not enough people. So in that case, as long as there's a rahim, as long as there's someone who's related, blood related to the person, they can pick up the rest of the inheritance. Never a spouse, right? So if a man dies and the only living relation this person has there's no living relation, it's only his wife, she takes her nasib, and then the rest goes to Bayt Mal al-Muslimin. She doesn't pick up the rest. If a lady dies and the husband is the only person, she has no one else, he picks up his nasib, which is a half, and then nothing else goes. The half takes him Bayt Mal al-Muslimin. Except if there's someone else in the family, anyone else that can inherit. So we mean can inherit. We'll go back then to the beginning of the slides. You find the men who can inherit, the women who can inherit. In these very weird situations where this person is just no one else, you look, well, who can inherit? You'll find cousins sometimes can inherit, and uncles. But these are, again, I'm not even dreaming of asking you a calculation with an uncle in it or a cousin. Don't even worry about that, because and this is honestly like a higher level. You have to really understand this. But I just want basic, something simple. If someone passes away, leaves a spouse, parents, a descendant, how do you do the calculation and make sure everyone gets what they want, and understand the concept of removing debt first, and make sure that you understand what a bequest is and how much is given. This is very valuable. You'll find, have you shared some of this information with people? Put your hand up if the people you talked to this about knew nothing of it. Anyone? Yeah, there you go, Stephen B. Yeah. A lot of people have no idea what they're talking about. Like you explain this stuff, no one looks at you. What do you mean? I can't give away whatever No, you can't. So when I die, if I want to give, no, you can't. But it's my money. No, you're dead. It's not your money. You're not around anymore. Once you're dead, it's not your money. The moment you go under the ground, it's not yours. It was yours when you were alive. Give away your money when you're alive, however you want. Inshallah, you give all of your money away to one person. Who cares? This is your money. Do what you want. But no one will do it when they're alive, because they want to hold on to their money for themselves. But you get to control us from your grave. Once you're gone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains the distribution. If you don't like that distribution for reasons that you see in front of you in your eyes, give your money away during your life. and make sure people are taken care of. Obviously, the sunnah is that you give your children equally. So you give when you're alive, you give your daughter equal to your son, except unless there's a difference, like a severe difference between your children in terms of their financial status. Like you have someone who's a millionaire and someone who's not having ends meet, you give them different. You still have to give both. You can't say, okay, you have too much money, I'm not going to give you anything. No, you still have to give them something, but you can afford not to give them the same amount during your life. If there's severe differences, if they're both middle class and just the difference is something of that is not fully calculable, then you should give them equally. And you're not allowed to give the male 2 times of what you give the female. Like that's not allowed to be done during your life, unless your son is dirt poor and your wife, your daughter, is very rich and she has her own wealth and she has a lot of it. Then you can afford to do that. Otherwise, you have to give them equally during your life. Yeah. Yeah, they want to give. They'll give wasiyah to someone who inherits. So it doesn't go to them. So if you leave in your will that I want to give some of my wealth to someone who actually inherits you, they don't get it. So I want to give my daughter a little bit more. No, she gets what she gets. If you want to give her a bit more, when you were breathing air and your brain was working, give her the more that you want to give her. That's totally up to you. No one will ever tell you not to do that. But you can't do that. You can't add to how much your wife will pick up or how much your daughter will pick up or your son or your father or your mother. That is something that is set. If you want to give them more, then in your life you're allowed to do that. The bequest is, as I explained, and we'll come up to it in a moment, al-wasiyya al-wajiba, meaning an obligatory bequest should be left for those who will not inherit you but deserve some wealth, like grandchildren who won't inherit because you have other children who are alive, like the sons and daughters of a deceased daughter, or sons and daughters of a deceased son, and there are other sons and daughters alive, so they won't really get anything. So you want to leave them. That's why that third is there, by the way, to make sure that they get something out of your wealth. So you leave it to them. But when people don't do that, it's the problem with the person who didn't leave their wealth. So here's a really nice example of what radd is. So you just have a lady passes away. She only has a spouse and a daughter. No one else in the family. So the spouse will take a fourth, and then the daughter gets, when she's alone, she gets a half, but then we have another fourth. She picks it up. The daughter picks up whatever is left. The spouse, just know this, spouses never take more than their share, ever. They just take their share, regardless of anything else. They just pick up what their share is. When he's alive? No, what he does with it when he's alive is totally up to him. What you're accountable for during your life is a few things. Number one is that if you're going to give your children, unless there are severe, again, very clear differences in their financial status, you should give them equally. If you're going to give someone else, like you're not going to give your children, you give other people, then you have to make sure that you leave something for them. As the Prophet ﷺ explained, مَا لَا تَتْرُكُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ عَالَةً عَلَى النَّاسِ. As he told Sa'd ibn Waqqas and a number of others, don't leave your children with nothing after you leave by giving your wealth away. So he wouldn't. Sometimes the Sahaba would come and bring to the Prophet ﷺ for a battle all of their wealth. So he'd ask them, "What did you leave for your children?" And they would say, "I had nothing." No, take back at least. Bring only a third. And he would say, "With thuluth wa kathir," and a third is a lot. Like take back the rest of it. Some Sahaba wouldn't listen, like Umar al-Khattab and Abu Bakr. One brought half their wealth, and Abu Bakr brought all of his wealth. He's like, no, they're fine. They'll be fine. Don't worry about them. This is something we've agreed upon. So you can give away your wealth, but you're accountable if you leave the people who should inherit you, like your children, with nothing. Like that is something you're accountable for. Like if they don't end up having anything, or don't have enough, or if they are not doing well financially, you don't leave them anything to help them out, that you can be held accountable for that. I don't think that really applies. I think that applies more to a child, a single person who is struggling or unemployed or someone who's ill. I think if you've left them well-educated and having jobs, then you're fine. Whatever you do with your wealth is totally up to you. I don't think they have no right over you on your wealth if you have prepared them to make a living and to be able to take care of themselves financially. I think this is more regarding if you're living in a war zone or you're living in a time where you have a child who's disabled or someone who cannot take care of themselves, or their children, they're very young. For example, if you pass away and you leave children who are 4 and 5 and 6 and you give all your wealth away before you die and then you leave them with nothing, then you're accountable for that. But if you leave adults who can take care of themselves and you've done your job, then whatever you do with your wealth is totally up to you. No one can ask you about that. It's just when you give your children, you have to make sure that you do adl. There has to be equality when you give your children. Outside of that, if you give everything to your sister, you give everything to your father, you give everything to your spouse, for example, you put it all in your spouse's name, that's totally up to you. No one can stop you doing that in your life. But most people don't do it because they don't trust other people. Most people don't even trust their children. to come and visit on Eid when they do that. So there's a lack of. So the issue of return occurs when, or rad, when there's extra shares of the inheritance that are not distributed. These are given to the heirs who have specific percentages assigned to them, based proportionately on their specific specified percentages. Neither of the spouses are given extra shares, and this is yeah. It does count as inheritance. Now, I didn't talk about that here. I think someone asked me about this, and I dodged the question because that's much more complicated for the purpose of this course. There are calculations that scholars have done. So if you go, I think it's zakat.ca or something. That actually breaks down for you the different ways of doing this and the different opinions that scholars have regarding RVSP when you leave, when you name a beneficiary when you die. Same thing goes for like life insurance. Like it's a similar question. So if someone is doing life insurance, then they think it's okay, meaning they take a fatwa from some place and they think they have a reason to believe that it's acceptable. Not that I'm saying that it is or it isn't. It's not, again, not the purpose of this course, but they do. In that money that which is like $1 million policy and it's brought, who actually gets that? Can you just name one person? Is this seen as tariqa? I believe, this is my understanding of it, and again, I purposefully don't get into this stuff because that's not the purpose of the course. That anything that any wealth that's going to be left after you die has to be looked at as a piece of your inheritance, unless the other person that's being named here has some contribution to it, meaning the other person is somehow contributing also financially in some way. If there's a person who's contributing financially in some way, then that has to be calculated because that person has to take what is theirs or rightfully theirs. Otherwise, if something is for you, it's your wealth, and you're hiding it away, because technically RVSB is you're just hiding money away from tax paying. Like you're just putting it away where it's not being. It's still your wealth. It's just putting it in a box where the government can't reach its fingers to take away the tax. So it's still inheritance. So. Wallahu alam, the majority of scholars that I've listened to have specified that it has to be treated exactly like inheritance, no difference. But again, that goes back to like Islamic inheritance will only occur if the family agrees to it. Like if the family members say we're going to go by the Canadian, then they'll just go by the Canadian law. Are they at fault for doing that? 100%. 100% they're at fault. People who just refuse Islamic breakdown of inheritance are at fault for doing that. Now legally, there's no way to stop it, so you have to accept it the way it is, but they're at fault for doing that. So everything I'm teaching here will not be something that you'll be able to practice outside of an Islamic community or Islamic understanding, or the person who's passing, who puts in his bequest that I want my wealth to be distributed based on Islamic law, and then they specify either an organization, an institution, or a firm that knows how to do that, and then they can do that for them. Yeah. Yeah, so if there's nothing specified, then it's looked at as 50%. So there's nothing specified in terms of a joint ownership. When you say joint ownership, there's no percentages that are specified specifically in the contract, then it's taken by default as 50-50. And then that once it moves, the ownership moves to the spouse, there's 50% that is owned by the inheritance. Now the spouse are an inheritant themselves, so a part of that is theirs too, but then a part of that also goes to father and mother and children, or whoever else is going to inherit the deceased. If there's a specific percentage that is specified, meaning he owns 60, she owns 40, or some whatever it is that they agreed to, then that's it. If there's nothing, it's just joint, especially when it's property, then it's going to be brought down in the middle. The bank account, there's money. If it can be calculated in terms of who put in how much, if both of them are contributing to the actual wealth. Meaning it's a joint bank account, like I have a joint bank account with my wife, but if she's not making this money, I'm making the money, for example, then she doesn't technically own that money. It's my money. She's owed her nafaqah. She's owed her nafaqah, and that can be calculated throughout the years, just for inheritance purposes. Then it's owed, so she takes that piece, and the rest is treated as the wealth of the person who passed away. So these things are, it can be calculated, and if they're not calculated, and they're talking about actual commodities, then it's just divided 50% if there's no other specification. Okay? All right. So I'm not gonna. These are just things I taught you out of the Blessed Brother and the Ominous Brother. You can look at this if you like. I'm not going to really ask you much about it. Some things we just okay. So here, these examples here, you can take a look at. I'm not going to. I don't think we have enough time to actually go through them. The problems, if you haven't handed in, the moment once you get it handed in, Sister Neda will send you the solutions. So even though I won't send you may not get this marked quickly, but you'll be sent the solutions to look at them. So you understand maybe what you did right and what you did wrong, just for your own benefit. The fact that you did the actual assignment, you'll get a lot of points just for doing the assignment, because it's hard. It takes time to actually go through them. I just want you to try, just to figure out how to actually do it and learn a little bit. And then you'll see how it's actually supposed to be done, and then compare your mistakes to the right thing, and you'll maybe inshallah learn, so that when we do it, when you get a problem, and yes, during the assessment, you can deal with it, inshallah ta'ala. Again, I'll leave you, all the miscellaneous points here are important for you to read, so make sure that you take time and go through them, because they're important. A daughter's children never inherit under any circumstances. Like a daughter's children, as in a deceased daughter's children. I hope you understand that. Like, obviously the daughter's alive, the children are not going to inherit. If the daughter's alive, they don't even matter. But if the daughter's children are alive, but she isn't, then they don't inherit. So they're the ones who are actually deserving of bequest. Obligatory bequest is not a part of the four schools of jurisprudence, but rather a modern opinion that is widely adopted by scholars. So the concept of obligatory bequest is something came up maybe after the 9th century of Islamic law, or maybe a millennium after Islamic law. And it started happening because of how society started to shift. Society shifted from tribes to cities. And once that happened, people started getting disconnected. People that get disconnected, the weak parts of society fall off. They don't get taken care of. But if you when they used to live as groups, then it doesn't matter who died and who didn't die. Everyone will find someone to make sure they take care of them. So this became an issue that started to be talked about quite a bit. Obviously, the bequest, and I use the word obligatory, but the bequest itself, the recommended bequest is for the daughter's children, recommended. But I'm talking about obligatory, where it's actually wajib, where the Sharia will come and ask you to do that. Meaning there used to be, in the last maybe 200 years, there would be someone who would actually come to the Muslim father or Muslim mother and remind them that their daughter had passed away and she has children, that she should put in her bequest, and they actually forced them to do that. So it's obligatory. Before that, it was just recommended, obviously, but the fact that it was obligatory became an issue that's worthy of pointing out. All right, and then all the points here that I've explained. So let's go quickly through maybe marriage and divorce, because this is another important piece. So just remember that these are the things that you need. These two things are needed for marriage to be valid. So you need the guardian, and you need two witnesses, and you obviously need the consent of both. He doesn't talk about it here because that's kind of just accepted. And add to that the fourth one, which is the mahr. So he talks about the two things that are needed here, because the mahr is kind of, there's two things that he looks at as given. He's just adding the two pieces that he thinks or that there's khilaf upon. Meaning, when you look at the different schools of jurisprudence, they differ on al-wali and shahiday al-adl. They don't agree on that. They agree 100% on the consent of both parties, obviously, and the mahr has to be there. But for example, the Malikiyya, they talk about the witnesses. They say the witnesses don't have to be there on the contract. They just have to be there during the ceremony for consummating. When you're having like a hafil or some form of wedding, they have to be there for that. To kind of there has to be two people that will witness this, but they don't have to be there for the actual signing of the contract itself. That's how the Maliki look at it, but the rest of them don't. The Imam Abu Hanifa does not necessarily agree with the fact that you need a wali for aqd. The rest do. So he pointed out, there's the two things that there's difference of opinion on. He said this is in Shafi'i, you have to have both. That's why the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis are a little bit more strict when it comes to marriage contracts. And I think in our time, and I think the only time you can leave this basic framework is when you have a very specific situation. When you're living in a place where you don't have access to certain things, but if it's a normal setting, then this is what you should stick to. And I kind of pointed that here for you. What else do I need to know? So know the muharramat, meaning make sure you know the people who are muharram, that are not, you cannot marry, that men cannot marry. It goes both ways, obviously. So make sure that you understand them, the mother and her ancestors, the daughters and their descendants, the sister, paternal aunt, daughters and brothers, and the daughters and sisters. And then the unlawful for nursing, we can just understand a little bit about the nursing. It has to be 5 fulfilling breastfeeding sessions in order for it to be fully haram. It has to be 5 fulfilling breastfeeding sessions in order for this person to be seen as the son of a lady by nursing. Once that person is seen as a son or a daughter to a lady by the virtue of breastfeeding or nursing, then that person is going to be treated, when it comes to marriage, as one of her children. That person doesn't inherit. So you don't see a son for Rada, they don't inherit, but they're going to be treated as if they're a sibling to the rest of this lady's children. But that person's siblings aren't, like they have nothing to do with this. It's only the person who breastfed. Only the child that breastfed that's going to be treated as if they're a sibling. So he can't marry, obviously, the lady who breastfed him. He can't marry her daughters. He can't marry their descendants, because this person is now seen as one of her children. So make sure that's clear to you. And again, I kind of explained that here for you as well. What do you need to know here? Well, it's all pretty self-explanatory. Just understand that الخلع جائز على عوض معلوم وتملك المرأة به نفسها ولا رجعة له عليها إلا بنكاح جديد. So the lady can perform khul'a, means she can remove herself from her marriage by going to a judge and pleading her case and asking to be removed. And it can be done based on a financial contract or an agreement, a settlement that happens between them, unless she has the isma. And I talked about this a little bit. By default in marriage, the isma is in the hand of the husband. So he's the one who's able of ending the marriage with, he can end the marriage. The wife can't, unless they agree on the marriage contract that the isma is going to be with her. So she can end the marriage when she wants, and he can't. And that is permissible. It doesn't happen very often, but it is permissible, meaning it can be specified on a marriage contract. It happens sometimes, and it happens in situations where there is a clear difference of social versus financial, slash financial status between the woman and the man. Like there's a clear difference, and she wants to own her destiny when it comes to marriage. So she'll take the isma, and she'll be able to actually end the contract anytime she wants. And I've seen examples of that in the past, and it's not unacceptable. It's just it's the consequence of necessity, a result of need. And then we talked about talaq. Obviously, what's important here to understand about talaq is that there's a talaq ضرب في طلاقهن سنة وبدعة, meaning there's a proper talaq and there's a bid'ah talaq. The proper talaq has to happen during a time of purity, not during her menstrual period, and that time of purity has to be within where they did not have intercourse, like they did not have relations. So if it's a time of purity, and she's been like that for the last 2 weeks, and they've had relations a couple of times, this is not appropriate for this person to perform talaq. It occurs, but it's wrong. The man who does that is going to be carrying sin by doing it, because it's haram to do so, because it's unacceptable. This here is an important piece, because I can tell you that the majority of the Islamic world follows the opinion of these two individuals when it comes to making talaq during an impermissible time, that they don't see it to be valid altogether. They're the only two scholars who see that back at their time. Today, a lot more scholars obviously see that. I'm not going to give you names of modern scholars because they're not very important to you, but historically it wasn't. Talaq was much more strict back then. It was a much more strict thing, and the usage of the word was a much more strict concept as well. Today, people become very loose, and it comes from lack of ethics, lack of morals, lack of grit, lack of resilience, lack of men being raised, unfortunately, appropriately to understand their duty within marriage. There's a lot of problems that we have in our society, which results in people not understanding what the amana that they carry and the importance of them, kind of respecting it. But this is an important ruling for you to understand and know that exists out there. You get 3 times. So الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. So you get to divorce twice. If you initiate a divorce, then there's a idda. The idda, as we'll go through, is ثلاثة قروء, 3 times of purity or 3 times of or 3 menstrual periods for the Shafi'iyya, as you've already seen before. During that period, if they want to go back together, they can go back together. They don't need a new contract or a new mahr or anything. But it is considered as a tatliqa. So considered as one strike, right? Then you have another strike. You can still bring back. Then the third strike, you're out. You're done. It doesn't matter anymore. She has her iddah, but you cannot go back again, right? You can't go back after the third strike. But here's the thing: if there's a divorce that occurs the first time around, and throughout the time of the iddah, they don't go back together, they can marry again. It's just they can't. They can get back together, but they can't do it without they have to marry again. Like they have to go back and rewrite a nikah aqd. They have to rewrite a marriage contract, and there has to be a new mahr in it. I mean, they have to marry as if they weren't married before. So they can do it. So and that can happen after the first divorce, after the first time they divorce and the iddah is done, or after the second time they divorce and the iddah is done. So they can go back and marry again. And I've seen people do it. I've seen it happen before. And it's usually very pathetic because it just shows like a lack of maturity from both sides. But it's important to understand that this is acceptable and it is permissible to happen. After the third, you're out. The only time they can marry again is if the lady goes and lives her life. She gets married, she lives with her husband, then she gets divorced, and they come back. This whole thing where they get two people married just for a day, just so they can. This is haram and this is not acceptable. It doesn't change the reality. The lady has to go and be married and live. And then if she has the divorce for some reason in the future, and they meet again and they want to get married, they can go ahead and do that. Meaning you have to go live a different life. You guys aren't compatible with one another. I did kind of talk a little bit, and this is kind of where I explain things. So I talked here a little bit about witnesses, because the concept of having to have a witness upon divorce is not mandatory for the majority of the scholars and the majority of schools of jurisprudence. I pointed out who thinks it is mandatory. I tend to carry that opinion. I think what you enter with the contract, you could leave with the contract. And a part of the contract being valid, in order for a contract to be valid, you need witnesses. So just like you're getting married based on a decision with witnesses, you're going to get divorced also based on a decision with witnesses. I don't get angry and end up married. I don't understand how I can get angry and end up divorced, right? Unless I am, insane and I have a problem with the way I carry myself. So I think that's where, because men were trusted historically not to do that they wouldn't do that. They entered this marriage. They're not going to leave just based on a moment of fury. They wouldn't do that. They would make a decision, and the decision would be, this is a time of purity. We have not had relations. We're going to do this appropriately. This is not working. You're not happy. I'm not happy. We'll end it. But it's not a moment of just sheer madness. So that's why I kind of pointed this out. Read these and make sure you have some clarity on them. Again, these points that I add are important for you because I want you to understand them, and I will ask a little bit about them. I talked about forswearing one's wife. This is obviously haram, and we explained a little bit what the expiation for that is. We talked about zihar as well, when he likens one wife to his mother, and what the expiation for that as well. So kind of look into that a bit, know what the expiation is. It doesn't happen very often, but it's important to understand. This obviously is charging one's wife with adultery, the li'an. We went through that. I'm not going to explain it all over again. Just know that the waiting period are two things. For someone who is divorced and someone who loses, or a widow. So it's a widow, then if she's pregnant, then it's just whenever the pregnancy over, even if the pregnancy is an hour, then it ends with pregnancy. And if she's not pregnant, then it's 4 months and 10 days. And so altogether, that's 130 days if she's a widow. And if it's not based on widow, if it was just a divorce, then also if she's pregnant, it ends with pregnancy. If she's not pregnant, then it's thalathat quru, and that's 3 periods of purity, right? 3 periods of purity, and then the iddah is over. And obviously during iddah, a lady should not dress up, shouldn't go out and take a vacation, but she can leave the house for work. She can leave the house to buy groceries. She can live, but she shouldn't be moving around excessively. Like I get this question a lot. Oh, I divorced. I want to go to the Bahamas. No. You finish your iddah, and then you can go and celebrate your divorce or whatever it is you want to do. But you go through your iddah first. Basically, it's the same thing. I mean, I don't get the question a lot for widows because they're much more it's much more difficult, so they're willing to stay for the time. But for divorce, I get this question a lot. So no, you can't go and you travel to visit people and kind of forget. No, you stay and you kind of deal with the fact that this is what's going on. And then after your iddah, you can go do what you want. You get married, you can travel, it doesn't matter. But the iddah has to be respected. It's a Quranic concept, and there's a lot of benefit for it psychologically and socially. And it does have merit, and it should be. And this is the classic example. of where interpretation of the Quran is important. Where interpretation will differ. The word quru can mean purities, it can mean menstrual periods, it can mean both. It can mean both. Words in Arabic can have again, you have to study a little bit more Arabic language, but this is a word that can mean one or two things. So some scholars took it as this, some scholars took it as that, and then we have two madhahib. We have two ways of calculating this. So, and that's where the rahmah comes into the deen, that's where the yusr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses words that allow for that, so that we have more flexibility when it comes to following rules. Explained all of this. Talked about all this. Yes, and maybe I'll just end with this because we're running out of time. And nafaqatu zawj al-mumakkina min nafsiha wajiba. The concept of nafaqa. I will ask you about nafaqa. A lady is owed nafaqa outside of the fact that she's being fed, clothed, and living in a house, which is what a man is financially obligated to do for his wife and his children. She's also owed a nafaqa, meaning a specific amount of financial support. Most scholars calculated around something around 10% of what's actually he's making monthly. And this is based on the calculations where these are daily, by the way, that we're talking, these amounts here. And it's based on whatever the man is capable of making. Like, it's not a set number. It's a percentage of what this person is capable of making on in terms of what his financial status is. So this is very important. And the another thing is that a man, when he goes and he asks for a lady's hand in marriage, he has to be reminded that he's obligated to have her live at a similar financial status as she was living with her parents. It's very important. And if you go ask for somebody, you can't keep them living the way they were living, you're at fault. For she can annul the marriage. A woman can annul, not get a divorce. She can annul the contract if the man is not capable of coming up. Look at the wording here. وإن كانت ممن يخدم مثلها فعليه إخدامها. If she was someone who lived and there was a maid in the house, he has to bring a maid to the house for her. Unless, of course, she's giving up those rights before the contract. But if she's not, he's like, no, I want to live the way I'm living. And well, I can't, well then, ma'as-salama, go and I'll find someone who can. She has the right to annul the marriage. And if the father is pushing for something, she has the right to do that. And that's important because when it comes to financial equity, it's very important in marriages that these things are taken into consideration. So we talked about, obviously, hadlana, the time is up. I just want to do a quick review of this first two. Honestly, I was only thinking I was going to do the first two anyway, so I got for the two chapters. We will stop, meaning this is the end of this course of the second semester. Instead of having 15 sessions, we had 10. Ramadan is in it. We will send you, inshallah, the timing for the assessments will be two. One will be in Ramadan towards the end of Ramadan, and one will be right after Ramadan. Choose one that you can do. Try to choose one of them. Try not to tell me that neither can work for you, just to make my life easier. But we will try and be flexible, inshallah, with the time, just so that we can actually mark everything and get it back. You will hear, inshallah, sometimes mid-Ramadan, exactly what the next semester is going to carry. What I'll be teaching, what others will be teaching. You're welcome to sign up for whatever you want, inshallah ta'ala. If you've only taken the second semester, or this course, if you want to get the certificate for Matn Abu Shuja, you have to take the first course as well and write that exam. And you can do that online. Like the Google Classroom is there, you can attend it and you can write the assessments and everything and get that. But until then, if you do this one, you just get like half a credit. We'll hold it for you, inshallah, until you do the first one so that you've studied all of Abu Shuja. I hope that was a benefit. You're welcome to ask for some check-ins. Even throughout Ramadan, I'll try and give you some check-ins if you have questions. And otherwise, we'll see you soon.